October 899. If Allah had been shocked by Osrith's presence as the proto-light of dawn dared tell tales on the events of the night, a hand scrabbling over the edge of the door of her mean house, she did not show it. The body thumped outside, blocking the door, and the British healer left her pot and moved through the mud to find Osrith lying beside it. The woman helped her up, scooping her arm over her shoulder, and the cloak around Osrith slipped from her shoulders. In her hand, a bag of silver. Allah inhaled. The woman was lucky, she thought, lucky or cunning enough to have this amount to hand. It wasn't hers, she did not earn it. That had never concerned Allah. All wealth had once been in the ground of the Britons, before the Romans invaded and stole most of it. She could walk, at least, with help. Osrith's legs dragged in the soft ground of Allah's home, falling against the wooden bed frame as she stumbled. But she was shocked. The ferocity of the damage to the woman's body meant that she had been abused by someone who had wanted to cause her ill harm, and Allah suspected she knew where it came from. The silver was meaningless, then, for it meant she had not betrayed Allah and the Britons. She looked at the woman again, who was trembling and shaking, as every position of rest was agony for her. But she could not be sure, she could never be sure, now. And the plan, inevitable, as it was always inevitable, was going to have to begin. Though the king was dying, a seed of doubt about their Cymric neighbors was planted in the minds of the Saxons. 20 generations of Allah's community had lived on this land, which was now called Wessex. Now they, too, would have to move west, ever the push west by the Saxons, who now, themselves, were being pressed. Sirrah! Allah called, through the door. Her 11-year-old daughter appeared at the door, black hair, pale face. Yes, Mama? Allah bent her head to her daughter. Take these coins, take them to every woman here. They are to prepare. Yes, Mama. The girl took the bag, hiding it in her shawl. But not yet. Not at once, not as a collective. 1 or 2 families would go, unnoticed, unnoticeable, as they always were, until no Cymric lived in Winchester anymore. Allah looked back to Osrith, another Saxon with little sense. Even after last time she thought the young woman knew to look after herself. She inhaled. Allah would give her the time, and be one of the last to leave. But the question was, where to begin? With the outer wounds, deeply scored and gouged and flayed. Warm, pre-boiled water was the start. The many soothing balms the woman had bought with the silver next. Allah looked at Osrith again, and thought of the man who had refused to leave Allah's house when she had stemmed the bleeding caused by the cumulative effects of the roots the woman had been misusing. Osrith flinched as Allah began to help her injuries. Her inner wounds were a different matter. She could not help her mind, the healer thought. But perhaps she would take Allah's advice this time. All this is in the future. Osrith could change her fate. Couldn't she? Or had the path already been laid? Is fate unchangeable? Widbith full arad. 88,888,888. That was a day in the future. A day, or maybe 2 or 3. Osrith knew no of the time she was held captive as she did as to how she had got there, hanging by her wrists in a dungeon. It was not one of the usual prisons, which were behind the armory. The damp smell made Osrith think they were below ground level. But there was light, of a sort, which she could tell behind her blindfold. The first Osrith realized she was in trouble was the pain in her arms. Whatever this place was, it seemed to be built for someone taller than she was. The silence was broken by a voice near her ear. You have one chance to tell me the truth. It was her brother. What truth? Osrith did not know. And besides, she was gagged, even if she did know what truth to speak. The Lord Utad demands you speak. That was Ethelwold. A chill stole over Osrith. If Utad and Ethelwold were together, keeping her prisoner, then this was a terrible sign. There had been other signs, being called a witch by people in the street, asked her business at Crapel Gate. Edward's questioning of her. But to have both men there, who she has crossed more than once in the past, that was not good news. Osrith struggled with her wrists, to try to get them looser, but was only rewarded with a punch to the stomach. Then, the cord was removed from her mouth. "I came to you to pay the price of my debt Toad," Osrith spat, her mouth dry as she spoke into the blackness. "You have the payment?" Neither Ethelwold nor Uhtred replied. "Lord Ethelwold," Osrith made to continue. But another punch to her gut silenced her. "The Lord Ethelwold will let you go," Ethelwold replied, mocking her for her use of his title, "when you give me the name of the person who caused the death of the Lord Uhtred's wife." "I do not need to know." Uhtred was standing just behind Ethelwold, and he was pulling at his bearded chin, as if considering something. "Then what are we doing here?" Osrith heard Ethelwold ask, playing daffle. A thump beside her caused Osrith to turn. "Shut your mouth, Ethelwold," Uhtred's voice. "He can't," Osrith shot back. A perfectly good ass was ruined when someone stuck teeth in his. "Tell me, what did you bring to pay for your crime?" "Silver. Or at least, I had it in my hand before the Lord Uhtred assaulted me." "It is here," Uhtred said. "Which explains your role perfectly." "Then, if I have paid the word yield," Osrith pointed out, "there is no reason for you to be keeping me here." She heard Uhtred's boots on the stone floor before her. He did not jump on her words immediately, and Osrith sensed Ethelwold was waiting for Uhtred's lead. "Britons came to practice magic on her," Uhtred proposed. "At a time most vulnerable. Your wife went to Britons to ease her pain near the end of her time." "Yes," Osrith replied. "No. She would never do that." Uhtred protested, and Osrith found herself laughing scornfully. "You do not know women," Osrith proposed. "You know how to seduce them, yes, but when the time comes, when there are life or death situations, women will do what they can. And so I went to the healer, when the abbess could go no more." "I have spoken to the abbess." Uhtred shot back, angrily. "She did not order this." "I saved your son," Osrith replied. "I went to the British healer, and begged her to come, paid her to come, to help Gisela. She would not. But she told me what I could do to ease your son into the world." There was a crackle of stone and wood beside her, and her words seemed to settle around them like snow. "So you admit you used heathen magic on my wife?" Uhtred's voice sounded strained. "Yes." "The name of this healer?" This was a different voice, Ethelwold's, coming near her right ear. "I will not say." "Is that your final word?" "This time, Uhtred." If she told them, the Britons were all condemned. She at least might get whipped, but if questioned after being released, she could deny it, say she was forced to say something. Yet, there was a fundamental truth to it all. She had gone to Allah, she had listened to her. "My final word is this, Uhtred of Bibbenberg," Osrith cautioned. "My first instinct was to help your wife, and my second to help your son. Would you not have done anything to help them?" "I have heard enough." But Osrith was not ready to be silenced. An anger was glowing in her, and his dismissal of it all oxygenated it. Though she should not have, Osrith opened her mouth once more. "You think you know everything? You think you can control the people around you?" If Gisela chose the Britons to help her, there was a reason. No one goes to the Britons lightly. They are the last resort. Gisela probably knew the birth was going to be difficult, which is why I let her through the gates to them. "You let her through? Or leave her this side, in Winchester," Osrith told him. "For you and your stupid pride? Oh, you'll go to Christians right enough, when you want something fixing, or doing for you, and your Danish paganism isn't enough. How arrogant." The words were catching in her throat now, and Osrith should probably have got the hint to stop. But her words flowed, born from rage and anger at her brother, choosing Danes and their gods over the family he left, over the name of his home, which he was so arrogantly desperate to cling to, regardless. It was Oswald's home, Oswy's. All their ancestors, Christian, who had enlightened Bernicia and Dirria with the word of God. And he wanted to ignore all that, pick and choose what he wanted, like a banquet feast. "If you say that by helping your wife I killed her with heathen witchcraft, then I did. But do not believe for 1 second I did act out of anything other than a desire to help a woman in huge distress. Another silence, which was eventually filled by Ethelwold's feet on the dusty stone floor. "Remember, I came here to tell you, and to pay penance," Osrith prompted, when neither men said anything. "I will remember," her brother's voice came, "that you arrived at the palace because you could not live with the thought of what your witchcraft did to my wife. You came to confess to Ethelwold, and he to dispense justice." Behind her a crack came, like the shaking of a horse rein. Osrith felt the blood drawing back under her skin, for she suspected she knew what had caused it. Steeper owned a flaying whip which sounded exactly like that, and she shuddered as she remembered the state of the prisoners who last were given it. They could barely walk to the scaffold. "You heard this warrior admit she was practicing witchcraft, Lord Ethelwold?" Uhtred summarized, "and in doing so killed my wife?" "I did indeed, Lord Uhtred." There was a humor in Ethelwold's voice that made Osrith feel sick. He wanted to do this. He wanted to hurt her. And, just as she was about to struggle, a hand containing the gag rope shoved it back into Osrith's mouth, blocking her voice, preventing her from crying out. She was still clothed, Osrith realized, when Ethelwold beat her. Not that it mattered much, her shirt would be rags within the first few strokes. And that was all she felt, as Ethelwold's arm swiped through the air, the sound of the blows echoing in the dungeon. Sooner than Osrith expected, the blows came no more. "That is for lying to the crown," Ethelwold hissed by her ear. "For betraying your position as a guard. However, you have not paid for your treachery." Osrith felt Ethelwold's breath move from her face and continue, "Has she, Lord Uhtred?" "She has not." Osrith inhaled deeply, painfully, as the two men talked, the conversation designed to inform her of what was coming next. "If she were a man, I would suggest hanging, and quartering. She is no better than a piece of filth. I say, do it." That was Uhtred again. Through the weave of the blindfold Osrith saw a shadow cross a torchlight and the figure, presumably Uhtred, stop. He was blind to women. Osrith raged, silently, their worth to him in being fed or have a comfortable household, or wanting them to hump them. Or deriding those to whom he was not attracted, dismissed them as worthless. Even Abbess Hild he could not appreciate for her piety. In no part of her brother's mind did a dimension to allow him to comprehend an intelligent woman like the abbess, and with it that she was entirely unconnected to him in any erotic way. Even this, with his own sister, and Osrith admitted that he didn't know that she was his sister, had to come to this. This was no trial. This was no justice. It was one Dane's chosen revenge. Osrith used her tongue to manipulate the rope in her mouth and spat it out onto the floor. "Lord Ethelwold," Osrith petitioned, "I came to you with Wergild. I expect to be brought to trial, as you were, to hear the king's justice." His reply, however, made Osrith gasp, as Ethelwold tore the blindfold from Osrith's face. "I am the king," he snarled. "The king above ... Alfred ... He has not long for this world. He cannot deal with this now. So he dispenses such roles to his other lords. Now, we, his lords, take the strain." "And what is that?" He leaned close to her ear. "Whatever I choose it to be. I attempt to save your wife's life and I am treated in this way?" These words Osrith spat towards her brother. And for once, Uhtred had no answer. But Ethelwold had. Raising the whip, he brought it down between her shoulder blades. Pain like fire spread out from the wound. 3 more, and she was panting at the agony. Then ... I wish I hadn't, Uhtred ... of Bibbenberg, Osrith breathed, the words heavy. "That means your son would have died too, and if I had known about this injustice." And, as more flaying came to her thighs and her brother laughed, Osrith's mind drifted to the time, with Skade, and how sorry he had felt for him. He had heard her say that he would soon be in need of a woman. "I wish that Seir had ended your life." It was not a short, rather, a cold statement, and, when Uhtred had not moved his head, Osrith wondered whether he had heard her. "What?" Uhtred's reply was slow in coming, but he still did not move in the shadows. "Maybe her curse endures. You have no land, your family are taken to be Christian, and you are bound by oath to a land you despise. I do not hate you, Utad, I pity you. There was a pause of a heartbeat and then Utad did turn and, in the darkness, glared at her with a kind of mania on his face. Then he turned away. Do as you will, Ethelwold, Utad said, strode away without turning his head, and she heard the king's nephew shuffle his feet in anticipation. And Osrith inhaled as deeply as she could. Utad of Bibbenberg. Osrith screamed, with all the force she could manage. Go fuck yourself.